Back. So for today's workout, we're going to be working on hills. And I want to mention two things briefly, and that's why they're important and then how to do them correctly. The first thing that I want to mention on why they're important is that it builds up your strength. Working on hills is a really great way to have a high impact workout with very low risk of injury. But at the same time, you have to make sure that your form is done correctly. If you are leaning too forward into your hills, you could risk falling over. And if you're doing an incline workout in the trails where you're forward leaning for a very extended period of time, then you could have extenuated stress on those muscles for a long duration of time. And the risk to injury would be greater than if you're just doing a higher incline workout on hills, 3 to 5 repetitions for just a speed workout. At the same time, there would be a risk to injury if you have the form incorrect on those as well. So you just want to make sure that your form is correct when you're doing the hills. So like I mentioned, for your form, you want to make sure that your body is straight, that your back is aligned with your shoulders and your knees, and then your ankles as well. So just making sure that you have a straight body, just the same as you would if you were running on flat surface. The same thing to mention would be just to bring your knees up. The higher you bring them up, same thing as if you're running on trails, you would bring your knees up if you're avoiding stepping on rocks, stepping on tree roots. Pretend that there are tree roots out on the hills. If you're going at an incline, you can imagine that you would have to bring your knees higher to step on that higher elevated surface. So your knees would come up higher than you would think they would to push yourself up to that next level. So your knees come high, and then your arms would push yourself back with a stronger force than you would when you're normally going on just a flat surface run, okay? And then another thing that's important when you're avoiding injury is you want to land on the forefront or the midfoot sole of your foot instead of the back of your foot. That's when you're going up. It's the same thing when you're going down. You want to make sure to avoid that heel strike, just to avoid injury to your feet and to your ankles as well. You don't want to trip on anything. So kind of jumped into the second portion of what I wanted to talk about, which was your form, but it's really key to the first point that I was making of why hills are important, is that it is a higher impact training with lower risk. The lower risk comes when you have your form done correctly. So higher impact training, lower risk of injury when it's done correctly. And then another thing is that because it's higher impact, you have, when it's done a repeated number of times, not just once, not just one hill training, and then, all right, I'm done, I'm not going to do it ever again. When you have that higher elevation training, done repeated number of times, getting your body used to having decreased levels of oxygen, getting your body used to breathing normally again after a higher workout, higher impact workout, then your body adapts to that. Your body's able to increase the amount of oxygen that's flown to the lungs and flown through your lungs and to these essential muscles that you need while you're running. So you're able to go for a run for a longer duration of time, and your oxygen supply will be better. It'll decrease your heart rate, your base heart rate. So what you'll see is runners who have a very low heart rate, it's actually a healthy measure for them. You don't want a high heart rate. That's actually a negative measure of health. You want a lower heart rate. So a lot of elite athletes will have a really, really low heart rate. and that's because they have adapted to having higher amounts of oxygen, being able to allow them to go for longer durations of time running, and higher amounts of endurance that's allowed them to go for longer periods of time. So if you've watched this far, you've learned a little bit about hills and elevation, and I just want to finish out the video by talking a little bit about ultra running and ultra marathons and the different techniques of how hills are incorporated and how they're important in ultra running and how they're a little bit different. So when you're running an ultra marathon, you're running for a very, very long time. And the way that you incorporate your hills will be different than when you are running sprints or when you're running a longer distance like a marathon. So when you're running an ultra marathon, usually you won't be running for the entire period. And when you come along hills, a lot of ultra runners will decide to walk their hills, and it's a lot of time it is a strategy, because ultra marathons, most of the time they take place in these gorgeous places that have a lot of elevation. For instance, this one ultra marathon, it's called Grand to Grand. It's in the Grand Canyon in Arizona, and it has a total ascent of 18,041 feet and a total descent of 14,688. You have to take into account both the ascent and the descent, because it takes a toll on your body, both going up and going down, because of the way it works your muscles and the strain that you have to put into your body going forward and going back. So it's a lot of feet gained and a lot of feet lost. And you have to also remember that you're starting at an elevation of about 5,300 feet. And when you finish at about 8,700 feet. So this ultra marathon, you're running for a very, very long time. This one, you're running over the course of 7 days. A lot of the most popular ultra marathons are 50K, 100K, and 100-miler. So that's about 31 miles, 62 miles, and 100 miles, okay? So the strategy of walking up those hills, a lot of ultramarathoners will decide to eat when they are walking the hills. Takes less pressure off of their body when they are walking the hills, and it reminds them that they do need to eat because of how much they're out on the course, and how much nutrition and fuel they're losing with being out and active throughout the day, or days if they're going multiple days. So the strain and the activity that I've talked about earlier of the strategy of running up hills will be different if you are an ultramarathoner.